Alright, we're going to add this A2JS loop tick function to our functions container, and we're going to try to get this wired up so that we can call our GL draw arrays every frame. So we're going to go way up here, and in our, we have a this init global functions here, and it should be empty right now. There's nothing in it, yeah. And all we're going to do is we want this like loop table tick. So, did we want that to be loop table tick? Okay, so table is capital. That's always mixed that up. Okay, so yeah, loop table tick, spelled with a capital T, and then what we'll do here is, you know, this is a judgment call. So my attitude is, you know, variables are snake case. Functions, we're going to use camel case functions, snake case variables. Okay, well, what about a function pointer? How do we want to think about that, right? I would like to think of a function pointer as more of a variable in terms of the data. But that's an opinion. It's more of a like, what's more important to know about it. And if you see it being invoked somewhere, then it's obvious from the invocation around it. So loop table tick. Hold on. So if you see this and it is, you know, and you see it like this, right, with this around it, it's obvious right now that, oh, this must be a function pointer. Okay, well, let's write it a different way. Let's say, oh, well, it's more of a function, so shouldn't we write it like this with the camel case? Okay, well, is this obvious that it's a function pointer from just looking at it like this? And I would say, no, it's not. And so by mixing this up there, and you're like, okay, wait, hold a second, why is it written like a variable, but it's being invoked? And you're like, oh, of course, it's because it's a function pointer, right? So that's why I've decided the function pointers are written like variables, because that just seems like the best way to style it to make the code most readable, based on all of the conventions that I already use. Okay, so we have the loop table tick. We seal the object after we're done with it. I'm going to refresh really quick to make sure it's still working. And I've screwed something up. I don't know what it is, but we're going to take a look in the debugger. So let's go over here. I don't really change much. I thought I just changed where that was. A2JS loop table tick is not defined. So we're going to... I thought that would be function hoisted, but let's see... oh, you know what? Maybe that's like... no, that's not a... A2JS loop table tick. Okay, let's match the case, because maybe something is spelled slightly differently. Yes, that is supposed to be a capital T. Is it loop table as one word, or, you know, I like, when I can't figure it out, I just like to, okay, let's refresh this. So this right here, it was loop table and T wasn't capitalized. Now I have capitalized T. When I'm not sure about it, I favor capitalizing the individual words rather than leaving one lowercase. So for instance, tile map can be really confusing if you write it camel case, because you're like, okay, well, is tile map, is it like that in camel case, or is tile map like this in camel case? And I don't really want to have to think about which way it should be, because, okay, technically tile map is one word, so it should be that way. But then it's like, well, I don't know, maybe we should write it like this. I'm going to favor more camel case than less, just because, I don't know, that just visually looks like a mistake to me. But that's just a preference. Okay. So let's see, where are we calling the init global data from? So we got this main here. and we init all this stuff. Then we got some like more specific tailored initializers, and we are not going to break apart the code more than it has to be. So for the main loop stuff, we can just put it like right in after all of the setup code. We can just instantly enter the main loop. And the main loop actually, okay, well, if this were like a proper, if this were like C code, then yeah, we would have a loop here, but that would probably stall. That would probably just hang our JavaScript. We need to actually have some type of event that's triggered with a callback. So with a set timeout. Maybe we can do a request animation frame. We'll actually set timeout because if we're going to update graphics as well, or no, if we're going to update game objects and things, I don't know, it doesn't really matter too much. Let me think. It would make sense for everything to be paused if you tabbed somewhere else, so I don't feel too bad about having this loop kind of tied to whether or not the game is off screen or not. So let's I'm gonna look up the documentation for Requestanimationframe. I know it's pretty much like set timeout, I think. Requestanimationframe. Oh. Just can't win here. So now I'm in Chrome. And Chrome is pretty good, except for defaulting to Yahoo for its search engine. Window.requestanimationframe. Okay, so note your callback routine must itself call request animation frame if you want to animate another frame at the next repaint. Okay, so the window.requestAnimationFrame method tells the browser that you wish to perform an animation and requests that the browser calls a specified function to update an animation. Okay. You should call this method whenever you're ready to update your animation on screen. This will request that your animation function be called before the browser performs the next repaint. The number of callbacks is usually 60 times per second, but will generally match the display refresh rate. So this could definitely be good to avoid screen tearing. In most web browsers, as per W3C recommendation, RequestanimationFrame calls are paused in modern browsers when running in the background tabs or hidden iframes in order to improve performance and battery life. Okay, so let's see, down here, okay, yeah, window.requestAnimationFrame. So do we have to do the function to call when it's time to update your animation for the next repaint? Oh, okay, so window.requestAnimationFrame is kind of like a set timeout, except you don't have to give it a number for how many times it's called, because it's just going to kind of naturally sync to whatever the frame rate is of your display, and so that's, I guess, usually 60 times per second, or okay, but yeah, but basically it's kind of like set timeout, but it's going to handle how many of the times it's called, so you don't have to do that. So what we're going to do here is, since eventually we would want this to be a the main loop goes here. Eventually we want the main loop right here in our C code. Oh, sorry. Eventually we'd want the main loop here in our C code, but because this is JavaScript and it doesn't really exactly work that way, we're gonna try to keep this code conceptually similar to what it would be in the C by kind of like doing things a little bit weird here. We're gonna just put this function main. We're gonna call it inlined main loop tick, not a function when in C code. Okay, well that's a mouthful, but inlined main loop tick. And we want to call it A2JS. Inlined main loop tick, not a function when in C11. So just a really obnoxious name, but the idea is just to let me know that that what I'm about to do is I'm not considering this a function. This is just supposed to be a body that we're looping over. So this is like a while. This is like a while one. In C, you do a while one or a while true, right? Or you could, be really weird and be like while true or one, and then, have people scratching their heads as to why that works. Well, actually, no, because C doesn't have true, right? You'd have to make a macro for that. Right? You'd have to make a macro for that. That's why, like, if you see while one, like, I had a boss who he asked somebody to write some Java code, and he wrote while one, and my boss just, like, freaked out and was like, fuck this guy, we're not going to hire him. While one, what the hell is that about? And I decided to go research, what is this while one stuff? Why would somebody do that? And then I finally figured it out that it was from, like, C code. And I'm like, oh, you know what? If you can write C code, you probably can handle Java. So I feel like, maybe we lost out on a good hire, but then again, if it's Java code, if you want to stick to how you're supposed to do it in a workplace, if it's Java code, you write it like it's Java. And if it's C code, you write it like it's C. So if you're a C programmer and you get a Java job and you start writing your Java code like it's C, that is not going to fly well in like a professional environment. This is my own code though, so I can write it however the fuck I want. And I have the intention of, moving it over to some C code in the future. So I am going to make sure that it is written in a way where it's going to be a little bit easier to move over to that, I'm going to make sure that's a little bit easier to move over to the C code when I'm ready, right? So request animation frame, and then we'll call this guy. And can we do it in the... I'm gonna avoid... God, this is ugly. This is ugly as hell. So we could probably like inline this call and put this function declaration like right in there. But the problem with that is then the function declaration will become a function expression, and then the name. You can sometimes lose this hard-coded name in the debugger if you turn it into a function expression, because then this name, right now this is a name of a function, but if you turn it into a function expression in JavaScript, this name can kind of like become a variable instead of a function name, and then it looks different in the debugger in a way that I really don't like. So I'm going to write it in this more obnoxious way, just so I can kind of like see. I could try to compress this a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about this. Yeah, we'll just... So it's, definitely will grab your attention, that's for sure. Maybe not in a good way. But I think it's good to maybe just make you do a little bit of a WTF when you look at it. So when you're like transcribing this code base into C, you'll look at this and be like, oh, what the fuck? And you'll give it a little bit more of attention. Because this is going to take a little bit of more special consideration when it's moved over to the C code. Because what I really want, right, between these MNLs, right, is I just want a for loop. That's what I want. But I'm coding it in this very obtuse way, just because this is JavaScript. You don't really do it that way in JavaScript. So, main loop, right? Call it below. Okay, so the main loop code, and all we're gonna do is we got the global functions dot, and we called it. Did we just call it loop table tick with no? I believe we didn't. Yeah, I believe we just called it loop table tick. And then we also need to supply the object that operates on. Yeah, and that will be in the. Would that be in the global data, or did we even define that yet? We made the struct for it, but did we? Are we calling new loop table anywhere? I don't think we are. If we look at this, the loop table is. It is a hybrid of variables and functions, but the functions are function pointers, and we don't really mix functions in code in the way that you would consider this like an object or a class, because the function is more considered data in this context. And the whole point of when I'm trying to categorize something as function, data, or class, it's based on initialization order and what's likely to cause problems with dependency loops happening. So I am going to consider this a loop table struct, not class. I'm going to consider this a struct, and therefore it goes in data. Struct instances belong in the that object. Okay, just a note of how this should be categorized. Loop table tick definitely needs that instance, but we're not calling this constructor anywhere. So let's look. Yeah, technically this is is this really a constructor, or was this more of a builder? Well, it's not really a builder because I'm not supplying parameters to it before I call it, right? Because if it was a builder, I'd have to instantiate it and then call it, or instantiate it, configure it, and call it, or call it but give it some type of big configuration object before I call it, and then it returns something that's configured. So I wouldn't really call this a builder function. Or maybe you could call it a builder function that is minimalistic. I don't know, whatever. Let's not think about that for now. Let's figure out where to put this. So I think it goes in the global data container. So down here. Is there any reason why it would go somewhere else? Well, let's see. It's global data. So it's not just rendering code, so it's not going to go in any graphics specific container, right? Because there's game objects and native Windows specific stuff. So it's pretty top level, and doesn't belong that nested. And like I said, I'm going to define it more as data than as a more as data than a class. So we're going to say new loop table is right here, and we'll put it right there. Loop table, and we'll invoke that right there. And now that we have, and we might want to make a note, this is the loop table. Loop table. Main loop struct. Okay. Now that we have that, we can go to down here where we're, whoa, boy, it's a ways down there. Is it a way? No, it's up here. So this loop table tick, we need to remember that a parameter to the loop table tick is going to be the global data dot, and then the loop table, right? Loop table instance right here. And we could write it like this. So this is pretty ugly, but this way we just have a little bit of lineup. You know, or we could just write it like this. I don't know. This would be more consistent with how we've been writing stuff. Okay, so let's give that a run, and what we should see is, like, once we got it working, we should just see a whole bunch of console log messages, like, start to stack up like crazy. So if we go F12, and so we have an error already in our WebGL code. There is no texture bound to unit 0. I think that's why we have that flag, so I don't know. I don't think that... Well, it's a warning, not an error. I cannot read game time of undefined. So that loop table tick, we've done something wrong. And for whatever reason, it's getting a undefined object. So we could... There's a few places we could put a check for that. So here's the loop table. What we'll do here is we're gonna just do a null check. I screwed something up somewhere, so we might as well put in a null check. So if not, right, and then we'll just throw that the null input, right, just let us know that the input was null. Okay, so now that we have that, let's go over here, we'll refresh, see what we got, and we do have the error message right there. So refreshing, we see the loop table is null. And so maybe I accidentally invoked this when I assigned the function pointer. That's my first guess of what I probably did wrong. And that's not what I did wrong. So that is undefined. Oh, because I put it inside. I nested that improperly when I set up the data for the global object. So in our global data, in our init global data function, we need to go to, I have this initial starting values. In that data, that function pointer does not belong in the initial starting values. It belongs outside of that. So what we could do to prevent ourselves from accidentally adding to that again, first of all, let's put this in here so that we have that kind of like loop table. Okay, so that's more proper. Well, actually, the comma does not. The comma goes over here to separate them, and we could kind of like we could be a little bit more obnoxious with this, just to let's just put a comment down here, make it a little bit more obnoxious, make it a little bit less likely that we're gonna accidentally put stuff in here when it shouldn't be in there. Initial values. Okay. And are we sealing it? Yep, we're sealing it, so that's good. Let's remove some of this extra spacing. Okay, yeah, sure, that looks good. Let's go over here, let's go to the top monitor, and let's give it a refresh, see what we got. And in the console, I see please wire up. And then I have a warning, and I thought this was going to be a loop. So why do I only see one of these? That's concerning. There is no texture bound to unit 0. Let's check that out. Is that really a problem? Is that like Is that like there is no texture bound to unit 0. Is that okay, let's go open up this in let's shut it all down. Well, first let's let me bookmark my music before I close everything, because I liked what I was hearing earlier. Okay, so now let's shut it all down. Let's go back into Chrome, because maybe I'm not understanding what's going on here, and maybe if I saw it in Chrome, I would see something different in the debugger, because I was expecting that to loop, and I don't see anything looping, and that concerns me. So in the console now, okay, so we don't see any error messages, but we get like these messages like one-off fired, and then no more looping. What's up with that? Possibly when I assign those function pointers as the default function pointers, did I accidentally invoke them when I assign them? Because that's something I know that I do sometimes. So the native window, and okay, no, that doesn't look like it. It looks like we're not invoking it here. And then here's the loop table tick, so I'm guessing it's only getting called once. For whatever reason, and we could check that to be sure. We'll if we comment this out, right, we shouldn't expect to see those functions get invoked even once. So let's test that assumption. So we refresh, remove our breakpoints from earlier, and we're gonna look at the console, and yeah, we don't see those. I'm not seeing those functions get executed anymore. So I'm gonna guess I just don't quite understand how Requestanimationframe works, or when I was writing that really ugly code, I did something wrong. So let's take a look at this. So it says inlined. So here's our inlined function, and then Requestanimationframe. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I don't know how to use Requestanimationframe. So let's look at it. Let's see if we can find an example of how to use Requestanimationframe. And I'm going to start a new video because I don't know how much time this took.